Hey guys, my name is Nicole. Unfortunately, Professor Connors couldn't be here tonight. He's here, but he's warming up the ensemble, so take a look. It's pre-concert time right now. So as I said, Professor Connors warming up the ensemble, making sure that all the instruments are in tune because they're fickle Renaissance instruments. But while he's doing that, I'm going to introduce you guys to a little bit of background about not only the Renaissance in general, but the two pieces that you're going to hear. So we have a madrigal we're going to hear and a chanson we're going to hear, which is French. So let's get started. Okay, so the Renaissance was a period of European history between the times of about 1300 to about 1600, where we really start to see a flowering of a lot of art and a lot of culture. So in the Middle Ages, it was more about religious music. So it was all church music, and all the music was written for a religious purpose, not really for art's sake. But then when we're in the Renaissance, we start to see art just for art's sake, and we have a lot of focus on the individual artist as well as instrumentation. So we start to see the harpsichord, the lute, a lot of really cool instruments. So in terms of specific musical changes between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, we really start to see composers focusing a lot on specific aspects of the music. In particular, certain accents, certain rhythms, and actually certain meanings of their words. So what you'll see in the madrigal is something called word painting. So that means that taking the text and the actual meaning of the word and putting a musical gesture that mimics it. So basically, like this. In the mountains, in the mountains, in the valleys, in the valleys. So basically what I just did was the pitch raised and it went higher when we were in the mountains, which are, a high structure. But when we're going in the valleys, the pitch goes lower. So that's just a really good example of what a word painting will be. So keep an eye out for that when we're looking in the madrigal. We also make the transition in the Renaissance to different ways about writing polyphonic music. So what polyphony is when you have a piece of music with multiple voices singing different parts, rather than just having one person basically sitting or standing on stage singing by him or herself. Although polyphony was present in the Middle Ages, there was one particular voice that stood out among all of the others, and it really was more important than the others. Kind of like when you go to an Ariana Grande concert and you see the background singers there and you hear them, but we all know Ariana is the star. The transition we make in the Renaissance is actually to having equality among all of the voice parts, without one being more important than the others, or one being the center of attention. So Renaissance polyphony would be like listening to One Direction or a modern boy band, where every member of the group is supposed to get the same amount of attention. We also start to see a change in the way that music is written in terms of imitative counterpoint and homophony. So imitative counterpoint is characterized by each voice entering the song at a different time, also singing kind of different versions of the melody. Homophony, on the other hand, is characterized when all of the voices are singing in the same rhythm, rather than everybody kind of coming in at different times. Everybody's kind of like this, da, 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 like that. And imitative counterpoint and homophony are very characteristic of a lot of Renaissance pieces, so you will see a lot of that tonight. A really important innovation in the early 1500s was actually the ability to print a musical score. So now instead of having someone sit down and copy by hand a piece of music 50 times, let's say, keep in mind they charge by the hour, now we have the ability to print 50 copies. And now because of this, music is much more accessible to the average everyday person. With that being said, it actually becomes a social expectation for music to be included into education. We actually start to see people playing instruments and singing madrigals in people's living rooms as a social activity. And the more talented of a singer and the more talented of a player you were, the higher esteemed you were among people in the society. So the Renaissance actually started to introduce social dances too, which was really radical from the Middle Ages, where a girl would actually judge the attractiveness of a guy based on how well he danced. You hear that, boys? You better hit the studio. So now that we understand a little bit about the background, about general historic Renaissance knowledge, let's go into the two types of genres that we talked about before. We're going to start with the madrigal. A madrigal is sort of like when you're singing in the shower or singing into your hairbrush. You're not really concerned about keeping a steady rhythm or a steady beat. You're more concerned about just generally expressing yourself. Madrigal is characterized by extensive imagery. We have a lot of expressivity within the words and within the music, and it's really, really dramatic. It's actually so dramatic that it paves the way for future types of genres like the opera. In terms of the musical elements of a madrigal, it actually doesn't have a structured rhythm, so it would be really, really tough to tap your foot to it. We'll talk about why you can do that for a chanson, but for a madrigal you can't. So what we characterize that as is free rhythm. Madrigal is also something called through composed, which means that each section of the madrigal will have a different letter designated to it. So instead of a form like AAB, or what we think of in modern pop music like verse, verse, chorus, and then it repeats verse, verse, chorus. That would be AAB form. But this form will actually be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, because there's never a repeated section, which means that it's through composed. We have something called point of imitation, which means each part, each voice part, is jumping in at a different time and is actually singing a different variation of the melody, keeping it really interesting. Madrigal will actually have differing note values, so I've drawn something up here to show you. Basically, this is not a madrigal, and this is. So what this would sound like, these are four whole notes. This is going to sound like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That means that all of the notes have the same value. But let's move into a madrigal now. This is what this is going to sound like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So just to give you an idea of the differing note values of a madrigal, so it really, again, keeps it really interesting. Composers of madrigals were generally awesome people because they actually used musical gestures to imitate what they were trying to say. So that's word painting. I think we mentioned that a little bit before, but we're going to reiterate it now. So basically, that's when we take a musical gesture and put it on top of the word that it's actually trying to mean. I also wrote in a lot of erotic puns, and sometimes death meant sex, or even an orgasm. Keep that in mind when you're listening to the pieces tonight, and we will truly get an understanding of the dirty minds of the Renaissance. An important musical aspect of a madrigal is chromaticism. So what chromaticism is when you play a scale and you're including all of the keys on the piano, the black keys and the white keys, without too much concern about how pretty it sounds, because it's not going to sound pretty, it's going to sound eerie. I'm going to play a chromatic scale for you right now. What you just heard was a chromatic scale, and that's going to include all of the accidental, so that's the sharps and the flats, and usually in a scale those are the black keys. The sound that comes out of such a scale, like I said, is really eerie and really sad sometimes. Sometimes madrigals use that to indicate that they're lamenting something or they're sad about something, but not when it's death, because we all know death is a good thing. Super interesting about a madrigal is that depending on the century that we're talking about, the actual definition is drastically different. All of what we just said, including all of the chromaticism, all of the word painting, all of the erotic puns, all of the non-structure to it, that's all a 16th century madrigal. If we go back 2 centuries and we're talking about a 14th century madrigal, there's actually a lot more structure to it. So instead of it being through composed, it'll actually have that form AAB, just like verse, verse, chorus. So it really changed in a matter of 2 centuries, the definition of a madrigal. But for the purposes of this pre-concert lecture, we're going to stick to the 16th century definition. Actually, I'm going to play for you guys a clip from a madrigal by Carlo Gesualdo. So keep in mind all the things we just talked about a madrigal, about the chromaticism, about the lack of structure, about the erotic puns, and to make sure you listen for all of those things, and we'll talk about what the words actually mean, and in the beginning you'll hear a lot of chromaticism. So again, keep your ear out for it. Okay. So if you guys noticed in the beginning, the first part of the madrigal was heavy chromaticism. So I'm actually going to read to you the lyrics. The first line is, "I shall die, miserable in my suffering, and the one who could give me life, alas, kills me, and is unwilling to give me aid. Oh, painful fate, the one who could give me life, alas, gives me death." So you can really see why that first line, "I shall die miserable in my suffering," was using a chromatic scale. The line after "I shall die miserable in my suffering" is actually, "and the one who could give me life." So now we see some light at the end of the tunnel. Somebody could actually give you light, which is why the tempo changed, and then we started to see more of the more happy tunes. And also, we start to see some dissonance, where we see some words like painful and death and kills, unwilling. So those words will have dissonance to them. So what that means is that 2 notes that really, or more notes, that really shouldn't be going together because they don't sound happy like we think of it today. They sound sad and they sound hateful. Those notes that will go together, either they're chromatic or they're just dissonant, and that dissonance will create that word painting, giving us the word death and dying and unwilling and painful words like that. Now let's move on to the characteristics of a chanson. 1500s, under the reign of Francis I in France, we start to see a new version of a chanson that's really light, it's really fast, and it has a structured rhythm, usually with 4 parts rather than the 6 parts for a madrigal. We also have a really important element called homophony. So that basically means that all of the parts are moving together in the same homophony and structured rhythm as a clear characteristic of the chanson. We also have an AAB form, which we talked about before, being verse, verse, chorus. So this is really structured where the madrigal was not. And it also has something called a strophic form, which means that at the end of the AAB, it returns to the AAB, and again, AAB, AAB. So it's basically, it just keeps repeating after. So unlike the madrigal, we don't have the erotic puns anymore. Sorry guys. We also have a consistency in note values. So going back to what we did before, this would be a chanson. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But then this would be a madrigal. But because we have consistency in the note values, that is more typical of a chanson. Some characteristics that are actually similar to the madrigal, so we still have word painting in the chanson. So we'll still have certain chromatic notes, we'll still have certain aspects of musical gestures following the certain musical lyrics. So that's really interesting that it is something that is similar among the two. We also will have a chanson might actually take it a step further and introduce onomatopoeia. So the clip that I'll actually play for you introduces sounds that basically aren't supposed to be human sounds, and they're supposed to indicate something else. One more thing that is similar to a madrigal is that the definition evolved over the centuries. So in about the 15th century, we have less voices in the madrigal, so right now we have about 4 parts in the 16th century, but before that we wouldn't have had so many voice parts. And we also have the one voice being the most important, like Ariana Grande is the star, while the backup singers are still there, but they're not really as important. But then as we move into the 16th century, we start to have more imitation, more homophony, and we have more voices as well as equality among all. Now that we know some characteristics of a chanson as well as a madrigal, we're actually going to look at a piece that's by Janneken called La Jouer. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And we're going to look at this piece as a chanson and then kind of delve into why it's a chanson and some characteristics that we'll see. So let's delve. Wow, this is my jam. So notice how you can really tap your foot to this. This is a structured rhythm. So I'm actually going to demonstrate where there's homophony in this. So what we're going to look at is pieces of, measures actually with the parts all falling in line with each other with the rhythm. So you see how this section here, they're all together. They're all moving at the same rhythm. Here again. I'm actually going to read you the English translation so that we can understand why he's putting certain onomatopoeias, or word painting as you may call it, into the song to give a certain aspect of, to give a certain feel for what he's saying. So it says, Listen all you gallant noblemen, to the victory of the noble King Francois, and you shall hear, if you listen well, clouts hurled from every side, fifes, blow, strike, drummers, turn, spin, make your turn, soldiers, good comrades, together cross your batons, ready your guns. So basically all the onomatopoeia that you will hear, it's all trying to emulate a battle. So it's all sounds that you might hear from a soldier. So buckle your arms, elegant minions, strike them, hit them, alarm, alarm, be daring, be joyful. So he's trying to give an aspect of not only a battle, but just a really, really heightened experience. I'm actually going to play for you right now some really clear elements of word painting and onomatopoeia. It actually sounds like a score to a battle. Right? So as you can see, this is a good example of a chanson, and how Janneken is using word painting, how he's trying to emulate the feel of a battlefield, of people running away, and And it's also very structured, it has a lot of homophony, so it's a really good example of a chanson. Now that you're all well versed in all things Renaissance, you are ready to listen to some pieces. Keep in mind all the things we spoke about in regards to the characteristics of a madrigal and of a chanson. Try to see if you can actually identify the genre of the song without looking at your book there, without looking at your program. But thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the show.